Hello, Buckeye fans, and welcome to another episode of the Bucknuts Happy Hour. I am Patrick Murphy here with you. We're talking Buckeyes. This is our first show since the Buckeyes won the national championship. I know Dave and some of the other guys, Dan Rubin, Bill Kurlick, Mark Porter, Steve Hellwagon, have been on the Bucknuts Morning Five discussing what went down and what's coming to some degree for the Buckeyes. We're going to get into all that today. It's just me. I had a few guests that I talked to that I was hoping to get on the show this week. We'll do those guys later on as we can get them on. Obviously, everyone has been busy these last month plus, whether it's watching, covering, whatever it is with this team. So some people are taking some time to chill out, and I completely understand that. But we will definitely get it, reactions throughout the offseason of various people that I think will be interesting to you guys. This may be a little bit shorter show than we've done in the past just because it's just me and you don't need to hear me talk for a full hour, but we'll see how it goes. Sometimes we get some good conversation going and it does go longer than I expect. So first of all, we're going to crack a brew for the Buckeyes. I didn't have a ton in the fridge today, so we're going with this Bud Light. But I did have this Big Ten koozie that I got. It was given to me while at the national championship in Atlanta. So I figured we'll use the Big Ten koozie today. And it got me thinking as I was getting ready, and this was not something I planned to talk about, but back-to-back Big Ten national champions, right? And I know obviously most Buckeye fans don't want to hear about Michigan winning the national championship and everything that continues to come out about that program. But I do think from a conference perspective, it's pretty cool to have back-to-back big national champions, given kind of the run that the SEC was on and how long it had been since the Big Ten had won. Obviously, Ohio State in 2014. But since somebody other than Ohio State from the Big Ten had won a national championship. And if you really think about it, I know Washington was in the Pac-12 last year, but they had already been announced as a Big Ten team coming into the conference in 2024. And then you had this year, Penn State in the semifinal. Oregon is the number one team in the country. Obviously, some other good teams that did some things during bowl season. So I think it's a pretty good time to be a Big Ten football fan. And we'll see what comes down with Michigan and whatnot and what that program looks like. And I'm going to actually talk about some of Michigan just in terms of their season this season in comparison to what the Buckeyes might be in 2025. I don't think it'll quite be as that bad, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But let's say cheers to the Big Ten and the rise I think that this football conference is on. So cheers to that. Okay, the first topic that I want to get into today is kind of the moments that stood out throughout the 2024 season. Now, some of these will be more obvious. Some of these will be things that maybe you didn't think of, maybe you did. Some of them will be some things that I saw that I think a lot of fans didn't see, whether it be behind the scenes when we're covering the team or whatnot. But just some things I wanted to highlight. If you are watching this live, and have some memories you want to share throughout the season, what was your favorite memory? Throw those in the comments. I will try and get to some of those throughout. It can be things as obvious as, when the Buckeyes won the national championship, things like that. But what were your favorite moments from this 2024 season? What stood out to you? If you have more than one, feel free to throw those in there as well. But I want to start with that Michigan loss, because I think there's a lot of narrative around, does Ohio State, did that loss inspire this team to go on and win the national championship? And like on some degree, I think it did. I was on the field after that game when obviously there was the flag planting by Michigan, or the attempted flag planting by Michigan. And like, for me, it was like that response that stood out the most, I guess I'll say. I know a lot of people were like, where was that during the game? But I think that the fact that the Buckeyes wanted to fight, and, I'm not condoning post-game fighting or anything like that. But the fact that they were drawing a line in the sand, and look, yeah, they just lost and it was a bad loss. But I think that and Jonathan Dickens here, Jack Sawyer defending our field after the loss to the TCUP. I don't know. It was more than Jack Sawyer, by the way. There were a lot of guys involved in that. But I think that spurred on what we've heard about, the meeting and things like that led to this run in the college football playoff. And I think I said it after that loss to Michigan. I still was believing that this team could go on and do what it set out to do, being a national champion. And obviously they were able to do that. But does it happen in the same way if Ohio State beats Michigan? Obviously the field is different, right? You go to Indianapolis and you play Oregon, and whether you win or lose, if you win, I guess you're still in the Rose Bowl, but you don't have that home game against Tennessee, which is something that will also stands out to me. And I'm sure many Buckeye fans, especially ones that were there. And then if you lose that Big Ten championship game to Oregon, now you've lost to Oregon twice, and you're probably get the Penn State route, which maybe I think Ohio State probably still goes on to win, given kind of the ease that Penn State had getting to the semifinal and meeting Notre Dame. And who knows how it all plays out. But I still think the Buckeyes go on and win national championship. I just think it's different if you beat Michigan, and different in a positive way as well as, not negative, but look, you beat Michigan. There's no Michigan fans on social media talking to you about, oh, well, this one has an asterisk because you lost to Michigan and all that nonsense. It's not true. I bring this up a lot. The Kansas City Chiefs lost to the Las Vegas Raiders and won the Super Bowl last year. No one talks about that. So don't let Michigan fans get under your skin with that stuff. But my point is, I do think that mattered, especially that moment after the game where those guys were like, this is not happening. And I think that watching some of those guys and just the anger of that moment of oh gosh, we lost to Michigan for a fourth straight time. How do we handle this? And then all of a sudden seeing Michigan try and celebrate that way, I think is something that will stick out with me. And I think it mattered a lot, in terms of kind of how things went down the rest of the way. Another pretty obvious one is the Penn State win. I think a lot of people saw, the what happened on the field, the celebration. If you were at that game, you saw the celebrations coming over to sing Carmen, Ohio, and things like that. But walking through that tunnel with a lot of the guys, half the team was already ahead of where I was walking out through the tunnel. Some of the guys were still around me. And then I stood at the end of the tunnel, kind of the walkway to get back to the locker room there. Cheers, by the way. And guys coming through, and the celebration that was happening there. I think the Buckeyes at that point knew, okay, we found something. That defense just made a huge goal line stand. The offensive line that was makeshift and would become even more makeshift found something in that game, and especially that drive at the end. There was a recognition of look, we're not getting too ahead of ourselves, but the blueprint, the foundation, that's a word Ryan Day and this team has used a lot, was there and was working. And I think that was a moment of real recognition, right? Because Penn State was a really good team. They understood the challenge of going to State College, even at a noon game, and winning at Beaver Stadium, and what that took. And, that was part of the reason I was so surprised with the Michigan approach, because if you're Ryan Day, and I've talked about how I think that they've messed this up with the need to be tough, right? And beat Michigan at Michigan's game and all that. But you did that at Penn State against a better team. And for me, I thought everything that I saw coming out of that game and at the end of the tunnel and even the post game, interviews and the way Ryan Day was, like, it felt like to me that was a freeing moment of like all of that stuff. And like, look, if we just do what we do, we're going to go on and we're going to accomplish our goals. And then they didn't do it against Michigan, which is probably the most confusing part for me and for a lot of people, I think, of why the Michigan game went the way it did. But for me, that will stand out as like just seeing those guys, seeing Ryan Day, even after that Notre Dame win, where he got to call out Lou Holtz and like, sort of get the monkey off of his back of winning a big game on the road and all that. Like, I don't know. It still didn't feel like against Penn State. It felt like he was really kind of letting loose a little bit. I think they felt good about where the program was going. So to me, that one will stand out. You have to mention the first Oregon game, right? And walking off that field and seeing how disappointed those guys were. And I had just had, cheers, as I was coming down from the press box at Autzen Stadium, I was walking with another reporter and we were talking about like, obviously it was very close and you have to go sort of outside of the stadium a little bit. So we couldn't see the field. We weren't sure what was going on. We're trying to get down there, but we were discussing the fact that, if Ohio State loses this game, like it's unfortunate, not the way you wanted to handle things. If you're Ohio State, obviously you want to go undefeated and have the best season possible. But if you lose this game, it doesn't make all that much of a difference. And like this was the first test from an Ohio State perspective of that in this new 12-team playoff. But then the game ends, and it probably has to do with the way the game ended, right? With Will Howard in the slide and the Buckeyes having the opportunity to win the game and not doing it. But just the look in those guys' eyes as they came off the field. And, I kind of stood at the front of the tunnel that Ohio State was going out and watched a vast majority of players and coaches who were on the field come walking off. And it was just, it was this like frustration, right? Of just like, we know we could have, maybe even should have won this game. And again, I still think if Ohio State does win that game, they probably still go on to win the national championship. Who knows how the season goes, but they, obviously we've heard about what happened in the 2 weeks and the re-engineering of the defense and all of that. I think, does that happen necessarily if they win that game? Who knows? But I think, I mentioned that meeting after Michigan earlier, which has become a huge talking point. Like I would almost argue that those meeting, whatever it was after Oregon were almost more important. And you needed to figure that defense out. Like the offense had shown against some teams before, Iowa, Michigan State. They had shown like this was a good offense, not a great offense, but a good balanced offense. Chip Kelly, again, outside of the Michigan game, was calling some interesting things. Like we knew what the offense was. And then like that defense should have been better against Oregon. And obviously you saw that, a few months later in the Rose Bowl, but I think that those meetings, those discussions became so big into forming what was the best defense in the country this year and like getting everybody back on the same page and things like that. So I would argue that maybe that was even more important than the stuff that happened after the Michigan game. But it will stick with me, just the look in these guys' eyes of like disappointment and we should have done better coming off the field at Oregon. So those are some obvious ones that I think everyone will, and I'm going to get to some playoff ones. I'm just talking regular season right now. And again, I know there's been some, but if you tuned in here in the last few minutes, we're talking about the favorite moments from this season, the moments that will stand out to you. If you're watching this live, throw those in the chat. I'm going to bring some of those up here later. And cheers. Thanks for joining us on the happy hour on this Friday. But here may be some other ones that I don't know how much people think about. The first 3 games of the season were not games that anyone was all that excited about other than the start of the year. Ohio State played Akron, Western Michigan, and Marshall, right? Seems like a long time ago now. And easy win, easy win, easy win. You're off to Big Ten play, just as everyone expected. But those 3 games, and this is not as so much of a moment, but those 3 games I think were really important for Will Howard because he'd come in the spring, hadn't looked great, admitted as much when we talked to him after I think it was after Pro Day, if I remember correctly, one of the days when we were out there at the Woody. Again, all seems so long ago now with what that season was. And he admitted like he was having some timing issues with these receivers and adjusting to the speed of things playing at Ohio State versus playing at Kansas State. And then he goes through an offseason or a summer where he reshapes his body, right? And he's a lot different looking physically when he comes back for fall camp. And even then in fall camp, like if you remember back to our reporting and whatnot, everyone's reporting really, I think, about the quarterback competition. Like we all thought Will Howard would win it, right? He'd come in as the transfer portal quarterback and everything, but it wasn't like it was so obvious. It wasn't like when CJ Stroud or really CJ Stroud was out there leading into his first season as a starter, where it was like, yeah, that's your guy. Like, why are you even, why are we doing this charade? Like there were points where Devin Brown, days when we were out there where Devin Brown looked good. And so I think with all that, like Will Howard gets named the starter. I think it was important to come into the season and start positively. And it didn't need to be phenomenal. And it wasn't, frankly, but it was really good. Against Akron, Will Howard completes 17 of 28 passes. That's 60.7% for 228 yards, 3 touchdowns. Good start. Western Michigan, 18 for 26, 69.2%, 292 yards, 1 touchdown. Good start. He also had 18 rushing yards against Akron. Then against Marshall, 16 for 20. That's 80% completion percentage, 275 yards, 2 touchdowns. Did throw a pick in that game. But like from a non-conference perspective, yes, you didn't play anybody great. But you got your footing set, right, for Will Howard. And like it was like, all right, I can play with this team. Like I am a good enough quarterback. And I think it reassured everybody that like this was the right decision to go with Will Howard. He was going to be your guy. And I think that's important. And, as obvious as that may seem, especially now looking back on it with what Will Howard accomplished this year and what the Buckeyes accomplished, I think if he comes out and has a rough start against Akron or one of those 3 teams, maybe there's some questions about Will Howard. And maybe there's some questions, I know we talked deep ball throughout the year, but like bigger questions about, is this guy good enough to play for Ohio State? Do his own teammates maybe start to question some things about him if he's not getting them the ball and doing exactly what we thought he was going to do? So I think that was really important. Another moment that I think will stand out to everybody, but maybe different in terms of the way I'm going to look at it. The Michigan State Jeremiah Smith catch. The one, I'm sure you know it well. Really, it was 2 catches. The play when Devin Brown comes into the game, and even the play before that got them down into the red zone, or 2 plays before that, or whatever it was. Like that was the first time. Cheers to Jeremiah Smith, because Buckeye fans, you're lucky to have him. Enjoy him while he's here. But that was the first time I think the country saw what Jeremiah Smith was. He'd had a good start in those non-conference games, but he, it was just the way in which he announced himself to the country. I mean, he had 119 yards and a touchdown against Western Michigan. He had 2 touchdowns, almost 100 yards in his first game against Akron. So, like, if you were a Buckeye fan paying attention, you were like, wow, this kid's legit. But that was doing it against a Big Ten defense and doing it in an impressively dominant way with especially that one-handed catch. And then, kind of, I don't want to say bailing out Devin Brown because that's not what it was, but, do you have a situation like that where Will Howard has to leave the game, Devin Brown comes in, like, generally, you'd think you'd go to your senior corner or senior receiver in a Emeka Egbuka situation like that. And it's like, no, we're going to trust to throw the ball one-on-one coverage with Jeremiah. And Jeremiah said, yup, And he's that guy. And I think that was huge. Not that Jeremiah Smith's season would have gone a different way had he not caught that pass or, had that play not even happened. But I just think, if I remember correctly, that game may have been on Peacock. So maybe the whole world wasn't watching. Maybe it was on NBC. I don't remember. Again, so long ago. But it was just important to me. Like, to me, that stood out as like, all right, I'll point at that moment, watching that live at Spartan Stadium, whenever people talk about Jeremiah Smith, is like, yeah, that's when you knew you had something special. And then he follows it up the week later with another one-handed catch for a touchdown against Iowa, where he kind of stiff arms the DB, which I thought was huge for him, back-to-back weeks doing something like that. Another one that I think is important, and I think looking back on it, like, this would be something that people don't talk about much, but that Nebraska game coming out of the off week following the loss to Oregon. Cheers. Ohio State should have probably come out and dominated that game. But I think the fact that game was 21-17 and the Buckeyes had to drive late to win and things like that, like, that really focused everyone in heading into the Penn State game, which we've already talked about. I think it was important in the sense that, like, yeah, we made these adjustments on defense and, they worked pretty well. And yeah, our offense was clicking against Oregon, but like, it's just a reminder that there are other good teams out there, right? And so if you're going to go to number 3 Penn State the next week and win a ball game, you better bring your damn A game, because they didn't bring their A game against Nebraska at home and almost lost because of it. And, that's a game Ohio State talent-wise should have won by a pretty comfortable margin. You would expect that coming off the off week, but didn't, and, had to kind of eke it out there. And so I think back on that one is like, grab your attention again. And maybe you shouldn't have had to because you just lost to Oregon. But for me, that, like, and coming out of that game, I picked Penn State to win that next week because I was like, this just, this something doesn't seem right here. And that's, again, why I think the Penn State win afterwards was such a big deal. But yeah, I think, the Nebraska game and how that was and just the reaction afterwards, guys knew they didn't play well enough. And it was like, all right, well, if we're going to go to Penn State, we're either going to have to play a ton better than we did against Nebraska, or we're going to get our asses kicked, frankly, because that's a good Penn State team. And you know what happened, 2013 and everything else. All right, let's get to the playoffs. I'm going to go game by game because I think each game has a moment for me that stood out that I saw. And most of these will be things that fans probably didn't see, just given kind of the ability for us to be around the team and, be on the field or things like that. So I hope this is new to some of you at least. But for the Tennessee game, if you've not paid attention, if you don't go to games, like when Ohio State, they arrive, they walk in the stadium, they do their walk across the field from the marching band tunnel, from the skull session. They go up the tunnel to the locker room, they change, and then, like, as in different groups, they start to come out and warm up. And the first group that comes out is like Travion Henderson, some of the running backs, and I don't know how these groups are put together, but I remember that first group walking out, and like the area around the tunnel was a lot of Ohio State fans, but like much past that down the east sideline was a lot of orange, and it was early. Like, fans were still obviously out tailgating. If you're a Tennessee fan, why not get in early? All that. But I just remember those guys walking out and like seeing that and like the look, they don't have helmets on yet or anything. Like the look of like, oh, kind of just like in their eyes of, this is what Ohio State fans do to other team stadiums. No one comes in the shoe and takes over. And look, once things filled out, like, yeah, there were a good amount of Tennessee fans there, and credit to them for coming, but like, you wouldn't know it once. And obviously that orange stands out, but the sound and everything, like, it was a home game for Ohio State. But that first group, kind of seeing that, I don't know what was going through their minds, those players' minds, but I just remember kind of the look on their face. And I was kind of having the same thought, having, coming down to the field and seeing how many Tennessee fans were there already, of just like, what is this? And, I assume that was a bit of a rallying thing for the Buckeyes as they went in the locker room and whatnot. And, they go out, they have the fast start, they win 42-17, and didn't matter how many Tennessee fans were in the stadium. The Oregon game, the main thing for me that will always stand out, this is true about every Rose Bowl game, is just the Rose Bowl. I love that stadium. I love the event. I'm interested to see if when we go out there for UCLA, when Ohio State plays at UCLA, if that changes anything, because obviously that's a whole different, same stadium, but I imagine it will feel very different for a game like that. But just, the sunset, I'm sure you've heard it. I'm not going to belabor that. But yeah, just, I love going to the Rose Bowl game and just kind of all that goes into it. So that always stands out for me. That's not a very exciting one. But then the Texas game, it was post-game on the field. And actually both of these next two will be well, I have a couple for Notre Dame, but post-game on the field, I was kind of off to the side of where they set up the stage. And there was a lot of the assistant coaching families and the assistant coaches, Jim Knowles, James Laurinaitis, Larry Johnson, some of the other staff members whose names you probably wouldn't recognize anyway, but a lot of those guys that kind of congregate over there with their families, friends, whoever it was. And the players walking by to kind of get into that area above the stage, and like the hugs and the, we're going to the Natty and all of that was getting said. Macareri was in with that group. Like there was, like, I think there was such a pressure on these guys throughout the year. And, some of it kind of self-inflicted pressure, if that's the right way to say that, because of Natty or bust and all that. But even if those words hadn't been said, like, everyone knew what this team set out to do, right? And so just to get there, they hadn't even won the national championship yet, but to get there, there was just such this relief and these guys hugging each other and just the emotions that kind of came from that like, yeah, we still have more work to do. And no one assumed anything at that point, but just seeing those guys all interact with each other was pretty cool. And something that I know not a lot of people get to do. And those are the moments when, they always stand out to me, but B, like, when I really appreciate that I get to do what I do for a living and be a part of, a small part of all of this and kind of bring you the coverage along with my coworkers and kind of experience stuff like that. And so I like to be able to share some of that with you guys when we can. I will say, since we're talking about that, Jim Knowles was off to my left with, I assume, his fiance and a couple of other people. Larry Johnson, his wife, were kind of off to my right, sort of in front of me. No interaction between those two. I know there's been a lot of talk about the relationship between those two. That was something I noticed. And another thing that stuck out with me. And then obviously we know how that all ends up with Jim Knowles going to Penn State. And then the national championship game, first pregame, two stories real quick. The first was I'm standing by the tunnel and one of the security guys is watching some of the running backs finish stretching and warming up. And he looks at James Peoples. And again, they're not in full pads or anything at this point. And he just goes like, man, look at that kid's calves. And like, if you've not seen James Peoples up close, like, the kid is built. And I said to him, yeah, and he's only a freshman. And he goes, get the bleep out of here. And I was like, no, I'm serious. Like, That's fresh. He's like, no way. He's like, number 20, right? Number 20. I'm like, yeah. He's a freshman. He hasn't played very much this season, but he's expected to be big contributor at running back next year. And he couldn't believe it. He was just like shocked. And I was like, yeah. I wanted to be like, yeah, this is Ohio State, man. It was just funny. And then the other moment pregame was Jeremiah Smith in the end zone, he'd finished the stretching stuff and he was kind of bouncing around, walking back and forth, doing some high knee stuff and like just kind of looking around, taking it all in. And like I had to remind myself again, similar, that's a freshman out here who's had a fantastic season and is now about to play in the biggest game of his life. And, just kind of, he's 10 feet from me. Just watching him kind of take that all in. And obviously, what ended up happening for him in that game. Cheers to Jeremiah again. But the funny part about that is then I get back up to the press box and I see on I don't know, remember if it was on the Front Row message board or Twitter or something, people talking about Jeremiah Smith with an injured hamstring. And I was like, well, he injured his hamstring. He shouldn't look like it down there. I think he'll be good to go. And it turns out he was just fine. And then post-game, well, first of all, very frustrating. If you read my my stream of consciousness, you've already heard about this, and I won't belabor the point, but usually we get let down in the field with about 4 minutes to go in the fourth quarter so that we can get to wherever we need to go post-game and not have to try and battle with everybody coming down the elevators at the end of the game. Apparently I don't know if it's AT&T or Mercedes-Benz Stadium or if it was the college football playoff or ESPN, whoever it was. Turns out we weren't allowed out into the field until 4 minutes after the game ended. And so we go down, a bunch of us were down in the tunnel. Like we couldn't see the game because they wouldn't let us out even like to the end of the tunnel to watch. So we ended up finding a TV in the photo workroom and sort of watching the end of the game there. And then they kept us, I don't know if it was a full 4 minutes, but kept us for at least a few minutes as the post-game celebration started. So missed some of that, which is unfortunate. But again, I'm fortunate to be able to even be down there at all. But the big thing for me is I was able to, and I don't think I was supposed to be there, but the sort of area right in front of the stage where the players that aren't on the stage are, and a lot of the coaches, sort of like a mosh pit without the moshing too much. And I was able to get in there with a couple other guys, and I was really close to the stage. I posted pictures on Instagram, probably on Twitter too. But watching guys like Emeka, Travion, Jack, Denzel, these seniors that came back, like taking in that moment that they'd done it. And I talked about after the Cotton Bowl and beating Texas and all that. But like, this was like, we did it. And you could just see, and like, I spent a couple minutes just watching Travion specifically because I know what he's meant to this team. G. Scott as well. But just him, and he was kind of off to the side a little bit, wasn't all in the center as they're kind of waiting for everything to get started. He's just looking around and like guys are yelling his name and he's pointing, and like, I have to imagine it was just a surreal moment for that kid, probably for all of them. But just kind of the way he was almost in a daze, and it was just cool to see. Going back to the Cotton Bowl, I forgot to mention, after Jack Sawyer's scoop and score run, I walked down to the Ohio State bench on the side of the field where Jack scored, like on the edge of the bench. And I'm kind of watching the reaction on the bench with Jack, and that was cool. But coolest thing was Nina Day and their two daughters, I believe, were kind of right behind me. And they were with another woman who I assume is a friend, maybe a relative, I'm not sure. But like the outpouring of emotion from that Ryan Day's family, and RJ's usually on the bench. I'm not sure how he worked out being on the bench while the rest of them aren't, but just you could see, and you've heard the stories, you've heard Nina Day, I assume, talk about kind of what their family's gone through this year, and especially after the Michigan game. And I saw somebody earlier say, what happened with Ryan Day's family. Here it is from Big John. The way Coach Day and his family were treated can never happen again. Absolutely. It was despicable, frankly, the way that they got treated. I understand getting frustrated with the coach and with the team and all that, but people took it too far. Anyway, the outpouring of emotion of them and just like hugging each other, arms around each other, all of that, what was so cool to just like, I didn't want to be a part of it. I didn't want to interrupt it. I thought for a second of going over and just telling Nina like congrats, but I was like, I want them to have their moment, right? And who am I, right? I've met Nina Day a handful of times at some of the charity stuff they do. I don't know if she would have recognized me, probably not. But it was just kind of cool to see what that meant to again, not even win the national championship, just to get to the national championship game. Fast forward to the end of the national championship game, stuff on the stage. Ryan Day comes down, and I happened to just be walking behind kind of the group that was with him, the couple police officers, and he finds his family and just the hugs, and like he's hugging his daughter and kind of pulls her out in front of him and has his hands on his shoulders and is like, we did it type of thing. And then there's a group of I assume friends, old, guys roughly around Ryan Day's age, all in Ohio State stuff. I assume friends of his, who knows from when, and he sees them and his eyes just light up, and, he's walking over and it's big hugs with them and everything. And again, just a cool experience to just kind of be right place, right time, to see, again, the outpouring of emotion after, anytime you win a championship, especially a first championship, it's a big deal. But to have gone through what Ohio State's gone through, and Ryan Day's talked about this, and I'm not even talking about the fan stuff, but, to have come close in 2019 and 2022, to go to the championship game in 2020 and lose the way the Buckeyes did in just kind of embarrassing fashion. And everyone only remembers that they got destroyed by Alabama. They don't remember that Ohio State had multiple players out with COVID and Alabama didn't. Look, Alabama probably wins that game anyway, but just like he'd come close. And then you lose to Michigan and everyone's against you and all that. And then he finally gets there, and you could just see in the way he interacted with the people closest to him what that meant in that moment. And it was just great to see because, I think Ryan's a really good coach, and now forever he will be a national championship winning coach. But also he's a great dude. If you've ever interacted with him, I'm sure you're aware of this. He's just a guy. And like, I had this thought, and this is the last one, when I watched him on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, where like usually, and not that I watch that show very often, but I'm aware of it. And it's usually like huge celebrities, right? It's, I don't know, actors, singers, whatever, like that are on that show. And then Ryan Day, who, just won, he's head coach of Ohio State, just won a national championship, obviously a huge celebrity, but that's a guy who 6 years ago, other than Ohio State fans, and not even all Ohio State fans who don't pay attention to who all the assistant coaches are, like no one knew who Ryan Day was. And, he gets the job at Ohio State, surprisingly to a lot of people. And like, I remember him talking about, not being able to go to the grocery store anymore. And just like, this is just a guy who coaches football. And, I assume every coach that makes it big, has success like that, goes through that at some point. But, it just occurred to me, like, he's just a guy, and they're all people. All celebrities are just people. But like, that's just a guy who coaches ball and worked his way up, quickly, and became the head coach at Ohio State probably earlier than many expected. And now all of a sudden he's sitting in a chair that so many incredibly famous people have sat in and is having to deal with Jimmy Fallon shenanigans and stuff like that. And I don't know, really cool. I hope he was able to enjoy it. Obviously, the Buckeyes just hit the road recruiting right after that, and it's back to work. But I hope that stuff like that was enjoyable for him, and I hope everybody on the staff, all the players, were able to enjoy it. I want to get to some of your guys' comments on your memories from the 2025 or 2024 season. Excuse me, Rick Montoya. Thanks for this, Rick. Travion 75-yard scamper against Tennessee. Yeah, what a big play that was. Ultimately, Jack Sawyer will have the play of the game forever. And cheers to Jack. But especially given the situation right before halftime, to hit that screen pass, it was important. And I know I saw Ohio State, I think, tweeted out a video of Travion's first touchdown and his last touchdown, both very similar big plays like that. So pretty cool synchronicity for Travion's career. Andre Green said, beating Notre Dame, not Dame, not just beating Notre Dame, but beating Marcus Freeman to win the, in all caps, national championship, followed by quite a few trophy emojis. Yeah, it was pretty cool. Like I mentioned, Big Ten, back-to-back Big Ten national champions, but also, two teams from the Midwest playing down in the South. I think that's pretty cool. And then obviously two historic programs. So to do it against a program like that, and then doing it against one of your own and Marcus Freeman. Doug Shepard Sr. said, I was at the end of the field where all the Buckeye touchdowns were scored against Tennessee, top row with my back to the concrete. Props to you for sitting up there, especially in that cold, Doug. Willis Stiles says, the day Quinshon Judson committed out of the transfer portal on the night that Scum cheated their way to the national championship. I do bring that up a lot, that Quinshon committed minutes after Michigan won the national championship game. Robert McIntosh said, the offensive line redeeming themselves. Yeah, I mean, that's a story in and of itself for this season, is the way the offensive line dealt with the injuries, overcame the injuries, shuffling guys, all that. Pretty awesome. Rick, again, he said, revenge win, beat down against Oregon. Yeah, I mean, the way that game started, the Tennessee start was great, but to do that against Oregon in the Rose Bowl, that set the tone, no doubt. Doug Shepard, again, said, getting to meet and talk with Travion Henderson, Donovan Jackson after practice. I took some of my grandkids too, pictures too. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Those are both awesome dudes on this roster. This roster is filled with awesome guys, a lot of which are going to go on and have success in the NFL starting next season. But those are two good ones. And I imagine that was a pretty cool experience, and, not surprised at all that they took their time with you and your kids. Rick, again, Ryan Day getting the last laugh in the end, winning the Natty and proving the naysayers wrong. Yeah, I just touched on it. He certainly did that. Doug Shepard Sr. again, Caleb Downs led a punt roll, Trey Muff to kick off. It was a perfect storm, a shit storm to be exact, but it forced changes. Yeah, it did. Sometimes you need stuff like that to force changes. Rick, again, Igbenos interception in the end zone was the turning point of the season, was huge. Against Penn State when that got overturned, definitely important in that game and really for the whole season. And then Rick S., the game that sticks out for me were the games at Penn State with that final drive and the home win against Tennessee. Those games showed what this team can do. Agreed 100%. I think I got almost all of them. Charles Parks, goal line stand against Penn State to stop them from winning the game. Very big. And I like this one here. Clever and witty. I hope I said that right. I learned not to freak out after regular season losses. They don't mean much in the new college football landscape. Hopefully more people will take that approach, because I saw way too much of that this season. Obviously, the first time we've had the 12-team playoff, right? So it's new, but yes, hopefully people learned that you can take a loss or two. You don't want to, but you can. All right. Like I said at the top, that went way longer than I expected it to, going through those things, but I still want to touch on kind of what I see for 2025. Obviously the defensive coordinator is going to be big. And, I've posted some stuff on the Bucknuts message board about what we've heard. I don't think there's a huge rush to make a hire. Cheers. It would not surprise me if there is some sort of internal promotion, and maybe that's, a co-defensive coordinator, a guy like Matt Guerrieri. Maybe he's a co-defensive coordinator with an outside hire who has more experience. So Matt Guerrieri has a decent amount of experience. He's called defensive plays. He's been a defensive coordinator at Indiana and Duke. That would keep a lot of continuity with Jim Knowles' system because he's worked under Jim Knowles for quite some time. But my sense is that, Ryan Day, as he has in the past, will kind of take his time with this. I don't think they sense a rush to get somebody in right away, as opposed to finding the right guy for the situation, whatever that may be. So obviously that's the first thing that has to happen. But you look at this defense in you look at this team in 2025. So here's, I'm sure many of you know this, but if you aren't aware, you're losing your quarterback. You're losing both running backs. You're losing both tackles. You're losing your starting tight end. You're losing your senior wide receiver on offense. Defense, you're losing the entire starting defensive line. You're losing your middle linebacker. You're losing one cornerback, a 4-year starter, and a safety who started 3-ish years while dealing with injuries. You get back the 3 interior offensive linemen. You get back a tight end who played a lot, and Will Kazmarek. You get Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate, Brandon Innes, who played a good amount. Then defense, you get back Sonny Styles and Davison Igbinosun, both guys who could have gone to the NFL, so that's huge. You get back Caleb Downs, which anytime you can have Caleb Downs on your team, that's a good thing. So that's a lot of guys that are gone after this season. I think Buckeye fans knew this coming in with how many seniors were back and things like that. Some of the guys they brought in the transfer portal were guys that were only going to be in Columbus for 1 year. So there's a lot that they have to figure out this offseason. I brought up earlier Michigan, and this season, I think Ohio State is too talented to have a season like Michigan did. I think however many losses it ended up with. But that doesn't mean that there won't be bumps in the road. Now, you need a quarterback. Priority 1 after defensive coordinator. We all assume it's going to be Julian Sayin. I think it's going to be Julian Sayin. I think Julian Sayin's really talented. We haven't really seen Julian Sayin do much, right? I've seen him throw in practice and have some really good throws and some not great throws. Most of that was in fall camp. When he threw in games, okay. But that's true about a lot of guys. So I'm not worried about Julian Sayin. I think, the talent is there, but 5 for 12, 84 yards and a touchdown this year. Not a lot, not a big sample size, but that's what it is. Running backs, you brought in CJ Donaldson from West Virginia. I've heard a lot of good things. James Peoples will step into a bigger role, no doubt. I have no issue with the wide receivers. You are going to have to find 2 new tackles. They brought in a couple transfer portal guys. I think that at least one of those guys could be an immediate starter in Ethan Onianwa. I think it's Onianwa. That's one I'm going to have to work on. Phil Daniels is the other one who came from Minnesota. From everything I've heard, this is a guy who probably isn't ready to start right away. Now, let's see what happens within a year or an off season of working with Mick and working with these Ohio State coaches. Max Clare, the tight end, I think has the potential, if Ohio State wants to use him, to be a really good weapon in this offense. And obviously you have these receivers, as I mentioned. So offensively, I think they'll be fine, especially if Chip Kelly returns. There's some NFL interest there. We'll see what happens with that, if there is even an opportunity for him at the NFL level right now. If he does leave, look, again, I think Ryan Day has shown these last couple of years, after maybe making some mistakes early in some of his hiring, that he is good at finding these right guys. Defensively, I think, is where Ohio State, it's going to be interesting. First of all, what's it going to look like? Are they going to stick with what Jim Knowles did in this 4-2-5 and maybe use some more 3-men or 3-down linemen as they kind of have started to recruit towards? Are they going to shift away from that? I think that kind of depends on the defensive coordinator hire. That's why I think someone like Matt Guerrieri makes a lot of sense if you want to stick with this defense that's worked so well. And then the pieces, like there are a lot of guys who have played, right? Like the defensive line, Kenyatta Jackson, Caden Curry, makes sense to step in as defensive ends. How good are they? I think pretty good, but not a lot of playing time and not a lot of sustained playing time. Same in the middle. You're losing Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton, Caden McDonald. You just had Hero Canoe transfer. Edric Houston probably going to step in there. So, like, what do those guys give you when they have to play a lot? Having Sonny Styles back, I have a piece that'll go up later today on his return. Huge to have a guy like that back who really started to come on in the second half of the season. And, first year playing linebacker. Made a lot of sense to come back, but doesn't mean he was going to. You're slotting in Arvell Reese next to him. Arvell Reese played well. Again, small sample size, but it looks promising. Getting Davison Igbinosun back, I think, is big. I know people were turned off sort of by his penalties and things, and like that's an obvious continued concern, but he plays really good defense. He's a good cornerback. The penalties are what they are, but a lot of times he doesn't even get thrown to because he's in good coverage. Or if he does, tackles right away if there's not a penalty. So I think that's important. Jermaine Matthews, we've seen a lot of him. Finding a nickel will be big. Lorenzo Styles is a guy who can step in there, but with the way that they move Jordan Hancock around, can Lorenzo Styles do some of that deeper safety stuff? You need to find that guy next to Caleb Downs, and Ohio State was interested in at least one transfer portal safety. I wouldn't say that means they don't trust the guys they had, but the kid from Purdue was really talented. And if you slot him right in next to Caleb Downs next year, I think you feel pretty good about it. I don't think there's anybody now that they're interested in. So we'll see who kind of comes out of that group at safety. But, my expectations, certainly it will be lower than coming into this season for 2025, no doubt about it, given the number of guys you have to replace. And obviously these will change as we see things throughout the offseason. But like this is still a team that I think it has the talent to contend for the Big Ten championship again. Could there be some losses? Look, you play Texas week 1 at home, but like that's not an easy game to start off with so many new pieces stepping in. But as we had touched on earlier, you can lose some games in this playoff format and still be in a good position. I think playing a team like Texas early will be really good experience, win or lose. But, this team could lose two games or so. Obviously, the big one will be, can you go to Ann Arbor at the end of the season and beat Michigan? You kind of got the monkey off your back of national championship, beating top teams, all that. Now Ryan Day has to go do that. This team has to go do that. So I think, my expectation would still be, regular season wise, like at least 10-win team. Like I think anytime with this Ohio State, when the way that they've accumulated talent, like anything less than 10 wins would be a disappointment, right? I don't know. I guess we'll see how things look, but that's just kind of my initial thoughts. And then if you're at that point, 10, 11 wins, you're probably right in contention for a Big Ten championship game appearance. We saw this year, no conference champions made it past the quarterfinals, I believe is what it was. So like, maybe that's not the best thing. But look, this should be a team that's, I think, in the playoff next year, right? Like you should have a chance to defend your national title. A lot of different pieces, and it has to come together. And I think it will take some, week by week building next season. But the talent is there, and I don't doubt that. Obviously, those couple coaching pieces. I know Justin Fry. I saw someone ask about that. Interviewed with the Chicago Bears. I think that's something he probably didn't expect to come his way. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there, especially after, his stock couldn't be any higher right now. Right. So got to figure all that stuff out, obviously. And if guys do leave, more guys leave, got to replace them. But again, I trust Ryan Day. Will be cool to see what Ryan Day is like as a national championship coach as we go through this, because I do think it changes some things for him. Anyway, going to wrap this up. We did get almost an hour here, so I went longer than I thought. Didn't gyp anybody of their time for the Bucknuts Happy Hour. I appreciate you all tuning in. I'll leave it with this since we don't have a prediction or a headline. Brian Applegarth asked, who wears the Blocko this year? My money would be on Sonny Styles. Seems obvious to me. Another linebacker, center of the defense, Columbus kid. This will be his 4th year, came back, already won a national championship, played multiple positions. That would be my guess. Anyway, Buckeye fans, thanks again for tuning in. Trying to get back on a regular weekly routine after the craziness that was the playoff. But stay tuned. Should be back late next week again. Talk to you guys soon, and cheers.